to Suffragette City Radio. We're back again. It's Sobering Maid.
And DJ Lippy.
So, how are you? What have you been up to?
Fuck all. Lockdown again, innit?
Yeah.
We're in the Greater Manchester area and they've just had a local lockdown, so we're not allowed to do anything really, are we? I mean, are we?
Probably not, but well, you can go to the pub, but you can't hug your grandkids in your own house. It's just all a bit.
You can go to the pub, but you can't go to the pub with people that you might know.
Yeah, from a different house.
Yeah.
Stuff like that.
But you can sit next to strangers.
Yeah.
But not like your mum.
Yep.
It's all a bit confusing, isn't it?
We
really?
limp on in this never-ending, indefinite lockdown, and
It's ongoing, isn't it?
Yeah, it's ongoing.
Yeah.
But for anyone who's listening, just remember to wash your hands, and if you're symptomatic, stay at home. It's not hard.
Eat your veg, get some sunshine.
Yeah.
If you're feeling poorly, don't go outside. Social distance.
Yeah.
Etc. You know all this by now, don't you?
Yeah. So I thought I was going to do sports this week, specifically the Olympics.
Oh, is it supposed to be the Olympics?
It was supposed to be Tokyo 2020, and obviously because of the ongoing corona crisis, it's been cancelled. Interestingly, one of the other Olympics that was cancelled, I think it was during wartime. I should have checked this before we started recording, but that was in Tokyo as well. So they just had bad luck. Yeah.
Yeah, don't give them.
I know.
The Olympics.
And their logo was so good as well. It was Tokyo 2020, and the 2020 was kind of done like the 5 Olympic rings.
Okay, yeah, no, I think I might have seen it.
It was such a great compared to our London 2012 one was a bit
bad.
bad.
Don't talk about that.
But should we start with you today?
Yes.
DJ Lippy, what are you doing?
Well, because it's all Corona, there's a bit of a focus on the NHS, clapping for the NHS and other key workers. And I wanted to talk about a little bit of a heroine of mine, Mary Seacole.
Cool, I've heard of her, but I don't know that much.
Well, she's a bit of a forgotten character. Her story was lost for about 100 years, and it's resurrected recently, so much so that she was awarded the honour in 2004 of the greatest living Briton.
Wow.
So she was a nurse, a contemporary of Florence Nightingale, and her story, not only is it really interesting, she's as a character in history, but I think it sheds a lot of light on the history of nursing, the nature of nursing, black erasure from history, and British colonialism, I suppose.
Right.
And the nature of being a black Briton. I think there's lots of parallels with a lot of things that are still occurring in 21st century Britain. A lot of things have changed, a lot of things haven't changed. But like her life story itself is fascinating anyway. She was born in 1805 in Jamaica, and at the time slavery was still ongoing. She was born a free woman. She was the illegitimate daughter of a Scottish soldier. I can't say that word, and a mixed race mother, who was a free woman. So she had sort of access to white society because she had a white father. Her mother ran a hotel for the elite of the British Army, and her mother was a doctoress, so she had local law of herbs and medicines, and she used a lot of like West African remedies and knew a lot of West African treatments. But because of where she grew up, she was able to learn from not only her mother, but visiting surgeons who came to stay in her mother's hotel, where she was known as Contrary Mary.
Contrary Mary.
So
Mary quite contrary.
Yeah.
How did you gotta go? Right, okay.
So as she was growing up, she used to practice all the nursing on a little doll, and then on all the animals she could find. And eventually she found some real patients. She grew up and she married one of actually Horatio Nelson's godsons.
Oh, right.
He was a white man. And again, this gave her some higher access to white society. Unlike her mother, she was able to marry her partner. And he was quite sickly, which was, this is like a little characteristic of her. She is very caring, but she's also got an eye on the prize. He was quite rich and he wasn't very well, so she got to practice her nursing, and eventually he passed away. And she took to the road and she went to Panama and set up her British hotel, and basically it was like a store and a restaurant, and she would sell luxuries to the officers and the gentry classes, and take that money and buy like treatments for poorer soldiers.
Right. What would the luxuries have been back then?
Just things like goods they couldn't get in the tropics.
Right.
So they were used to eating like monkeys and iguanas, so she
Right.
tried to give them like things like beef stew and things like that.
Right. Okay.
And import things. Her husband was a trader, so she had links through him, and she was also a trader herself. She travelled to England and brought supplies back when she came back to Jamaica for the officers at her mother's hotel. So she's always had a bit of like an entrepreneurial spirit.
Mm-hmm.
But what she did when she was there is she like used to use the money she made off selling like the luxuries to the officers, and she'd treat like the poorer soldiers who didn't have any money. So she'd make cures for them. When she got there was an outbreak of cholera, and so she got a lot of experience here in treating the epidemic, which would be very useful in her future life. So she is known for her work in the Crimea.
Right. Now that rings a bell, because I can think of another nurse who was famous for her work in the Crimea, Florence Nightingale.
Yes.
Right.
The Lady of the Lamp, who is known as the mother of nursing. And actually it's really interesting because they knew each other and they did not get on very well.
No, that is interesting. Why do you think that is?
Well, Florence Nightingale wanted to be the queen of the Crimean War.
Okay.
And she wasn't happy with this basically mixed race upstart coming along, trying to take all her glory, I think.
Right.
There's sort of many reasons. We'll go into some of them. Bit of everything really. They had very different approaches to nursing. But to get back to the story, in 1854 the Crimean War broke out. Do you know anything about the Crimean War?
That it happened in Crimea, and I'll be honest, if you'd asked me to point to Crimea on a map up until a few years ago, I would have had no idea.
Yeah.
And I only know now that it's disputed territory between Ukraine and Russia because of the annexation that happened a couple of years ago as well.
Yeah, well,
That's all I know about Crimea.
It was a bit like a precursor to the First World War.
Okay.
It was like a conflict that sort of blew up, and it drew in lots of countries
As a
into
proxy
like
war.
a proxy war.
Yeah, right.
So it was basically Russia versus, I believe it was like France, Sardinia, England, and the Ottoman Empire. But basically it was a disaster. Trench warfare, mismanagement basically. They had supply issues, no clothes, no food.
Oh, God.
23,000 British soldiers died, of which only 5,000 died of like actual war wounds.
Right. What was the rest then? Bad conditions.
Cholera.
Yeah.
Diphtheria, because of the conditions out there. So when it all kicked off, Florence Nightingale, she was really well connected. She is the daughter of. I'll just give some background, because she was, I guess, the nurse put in charge of the medical care out there as the nursing. She led a nursing team, and she was sent out there by the War Office, and she was like the daughter of gentry, so she's a very well-to-do woman, which gave her access to the levers of power. So she went out there to set up a hospital in Turkey, and Mary Seacole hears about this, and she thinks, aye. So she goes out there. She thinks, I can help out here. Now she goes over there, and she's very proud of her British heritage. She is a Creole. She's mixed race. She is Jamaican, but she's also got a lot of British husband, British Scottish father. So she gets out there. She's fully expecting. She's got all this experience. She knocks on the War Office's door, like, I think you need my help, and they're basically like, oh, no. No, we do not. Thank you. And she's shocked by this, and she goes around everywhere, like trying to offer her services, and everywhere they just close the door on her. She's this middle-aged woman, kind of a little bit eccentric, and she's mixed race, so basically a lot of it is like race-based. And so eventually she hears about Florence Nightingale's war effort in the hospital, so she tries to get to place, and the board are like, no, thank you. So she's like, right, okay. Now, she's like, well, you know what? I'm going to go out there anyway. Her brother-in-law, Thomas Day, I believe is his name. He's another merchant who she met in the Crimea, and in Panama, I believe. And so they go out there with the intention to do some trading and do what she's done in the past, really. Set up like a hotel, restaurant with a little apothecary.
Okay.
And sell luxuries to the officers to buy medicines for the the common soldier, basically. Yeah. So she goes out there. She gets there. She basically makes this hospital from like whatever she can find there, because it's the middle of a war zone.
Right, of course. Yeah.
And again, like this is another thing. So Mary Seacole's on the front line. She's 4 miles behind enemy line. In front of enemy lines? Yeah, before the front line. Meanwhile, the Nightingale's hospital is in Turkey, right, which is 4 days sail away.
Right.
So it really gives you an idea of the two sort of elements, the two sides of nursing.
Yeah.
So previous to Florence Nightingale coming along, nursing wasn't well respected. Nurses were seen very often in the public imagination. They were seen as sort of quite lecherous characters.
Oh, right, okay.
Quite drunken often. You know the idea, Carry On Nurse?
Right.
You know, like Barbara Windsor's character?
Yeah, okay.
That was and it's still in the popular imagination, but that's how nurses were perceived.
Right.
And Florence Nightingale, she was like, no, this is I want to sort of give some respectability to the profession.
Yeah.
And obviously her having a link to the military, there was an idea of like order, cleanliness, discipline.
Yeah.
And she did a lot because she was one of the first people to introduce decent hygiene, and isolate the sick, and introduce a lot of protocols that we still use now in the treatment of infectious diseases. But yeah, again, she was very hands off.
Right.
She didn't like to touch the patients.
Right. Oh, I didn't know that.
No,
okay.
yeah, the patients would often say, you'd see her. She was the lady of the lamp. You'd see her with the lamp, but you couldn't actually.
Right.
She wouldn't actually come up, and she wasn't very hands on with people. Whereas Mary Seacole, she was like a hands on healer.
Right.
She would like hold you as you were dying, sort of thing, and her like hotel that she set up, as well as offering it's like an apothecary, so she offered treatments, but also she was very much aware of like the morale aspect of the treatments and the soldiers that they needed entertaining, really. And
that stuff can make a difference to recovery rates, doesn't it? It's quite interesting.
And mothering as much as anything else, like if somebody's unwell, you want somebody to lay your hands on. You don't want them to, scrub your face or something. Well, you do, but
Yeah.
So there's like two elements of nursing. They're both quite important. But there was a clash between there's obviously a bit of a clash there. So yeah, I mean but Mary Seacole, again, hands on. She was like a battle surgeon, so she used to go to the front line.
Right.
She could set bones, she could suture wounds on the battlefield, so she wasn't afraid to get her hands dirty. Yeah. And it was quite interesting, actually. Another interesting thing about the Crimean War is it was like the birth of journalism.
Right, yeah, okay.
Because they could... War coverage, the war correspondence, right. So they could telegram. I think there was they could get the information from the front line back to London, so there was a great thirst for this. So whilst Florence Nightingale grew a reputation as the Lady of the Lamp, Mary Seacole was also out there. And so yeah, she set up the British Hotel. She had the same formula. She would network with all of the officers and sell them luxuries, take the money and give it to medicine to the poor. And the war went on for, I believe, about 18 months. But then in 1856, peace was declared.
Right.
And it bankrupted her. She had to leave all her supplies behind Russian lines. Right. And she didn't have any liquid assets. It was all, she was trading. She ended up being bankrupt. Came back to London. And she was literally living in some apartments, middle-aged woman, no connections in London. What am I gonna do? But then the veterans heard about her in the shit, basically, and they organised a fundraiser which was attended by 80,000 people.
Wow.
She was so well loved. She was known as Mother Seacole.
Right.
You know, and
Quite a change from Contrary Mary.
yeah,
to
yeah.
Mother Seacole.
Yeah, and I mean, again, another part of it, she takes full advantage of the situation, and she releases an autobiography called The Wonderful Adventures of Mary Seacole in Many Lands, which is why we know so much about her life. It's largely based on her own, record of it. So yeah, she was a huge public figure after this. You know, she was just so well loved. Again, it was in part due, you know, to the journalism. You know, it was a good story. It's a brilliant story to tell. She was given a royal pension.
Oh, right.
Yeah. Known as the Mother of Crimea, and unfortunately though, her reputation didn't last long after death. She tried to re-enlist in after this to help again with like other wars, but Florence Nightingale, pissed off. She didn't like her. She basically like writ a poison letter campaign against her.
Right.
Written to different organisations to say, do not have this woman. Right. She didn't like that she made money and sold alcohol. Right. And again, this is like a class thing, isn't it? Like the aristocracy hate traders basically, and anybody, it's like seen as, you know, a dirty thing. So she blocked her offers to help with the other war efforts, and she said, quote, anyone who employs Mrs. Seacole will introduce much kindness, also much improper conduct wherever she is. So yeah, I mean, unfortunately, like we know that Florence Nightingale is known as the mother of nursing, and a lot of her protocols are still in place now, and you know, a lot of modern nursing is based off that. But Mary Seacole, she was sort of forgotten after she died. A lot of her like medicines and treatments, it wasn't followed up, so we don't know like what she was using to treat people. And she's sort of been forgotten and erased from history. Soon after she the Crimean War ended, you had the Indian Mutiny, right. And there was another rebellion in Jamaica, and this basically just led to a more racist society. There was a real hardening after that point, and that's when you get a lot more like scientific racism and the idea of like eugenics and the different races. Right. It was still racist before then, don't get me wrong, but it really, really sort of hardened British attitudes towards people of like non-white descendancy and people in the colonies.
Right. And then I suppose, as you say, you've got all the scientific racism, because at that point in the 19th century it was all the scientific age, all these discoveries, and then they try and legitimise racism by saying they've got different brain sizes or whatever.
Well, and you know what the cheek of it is? I mean, you know, a lot of her treatments would have been based on West African treatments. Things like, smallpox was the first vaccination. Yeah. Vaccinations were first practiced by in like Africa. They'd been practiced in like around the world, and it was well known, and it was something that the Western doctors saw, basically stole their homework, and like passed it off as their own. So yeah, and again, this erasure from history is something that we've seen sort of time and again, Black British history. So, you know, as soon as sort of all the veterans from that war died, the memory of Mother Seacole died with them. Thanks to the actions of people like Florence Nightingale, who literally was the only nurse in the village. Yeah. Went out of her way to erase the contribution that she'd made. So she went quiet for many years, but then in 1984, her autobiography was republished, and she sort of grew in popularity. So much so that there's now a statue of her in St Thomas's Hospital, in London. Oh, lovely! And her portrait now sits in the National Portrait Gallery, next to one of Florence Nightingale. Great. But yeah, it does bring home a lot of sort of parallels with modern day the NHS now. The nursing staff are largely made up of people from Global South, elsewhere. I think Windrush, you know, the first sort of lot of immigrants who came to the country after World War II, were asked, like a lot of nurses, the nursing staff from Jamaica came over.
Yeah.
And again, had a similar experience to Mary Seacole, because they'd been told in Jamaica, like, you know, this is the motherland. If you come to England, everybody will love you. And they came over here and they were like, oh, shit, they're racist here as well.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? Like, people knew it was racist in Jamaica, but they didn't think it would be racist over here. And then they came over here and they're like, oh, no.
Yeah.
And also, like, you know, a bit of the erasure of history is still going on. I think a lot of the pandemic response in the media, there's been a lot of criticism of the way that it's also being whitewashed on the news. Like, the majority of the NHS are from Afro-Caribbean or BAME, black ethnic minority backgrounds. If you watch the coverage on the news, white nurses, white doctors. So have we learnt any lessons from history? Are we repeating the mistakes of the past?
I've noticed that in some of the experts as well. There's a lot of white blokes who've been experts, but there's an interesting expert, professor of immunology at Oxford, Sunetra Gupta. She says some really interesting things, and I don't see a lot of her on the news so much.
Well, I think it's sort of subliminal bias or literal bias, you know. People, the media class tends to be white and middle class, so I think they just look for people who look like them and put them on the telly, don't they?
Yeah.
But yeah, it's a really interesting piece of history, really interesting character, and a really interesting sort of window into, like I say, not just British history, but also the history of nursing and the sort of the fight, not fight, what's the word I'm looking for? The
tension and conflict.
Yeah, the tension between this idea of should a nurse be the professional, sort of almost disciplinarian versus, you know, a warm, like mother-like figure almost.
Yeah, do you need a school mom or do you need a mother?
Yeah, which you kind of want both, really, don't you?
Yeah. It's the thing that strikes me as well about that is in both those cases, Florence Nightingale and Mary Seacole, they both kind of had access to society. Florence Nightingale more so because she had more of an aristocratic background, but Mary Seacole, she's still, like, they both had a certain amount of wealth to be able to go into nursing when they did, and to be able to do their research. Like, you need wealth gives you the luxury of time to do research into things like this. But yeah, very interesting.
Yeah she's a bit of a heroine of mine. I think she's really cool.
I think the first time I heard of her, I read about her somewhere, and then there's a sketch show on CBBC called Horrible Histories, and they had a little sketch about Mary Seacole and a song as well. They do lots of parody songs on it, and it was fab, and I learnt loads from that little sketch as well. And then I went away and read up about her. Yeah, interesting woman. But you've taught me a lot of stuff just now, so thanks for that. Yeah, that's been really interesting.
I think there's a film coming out soon.
Oh, right.
Which I'm not sure on the details. I'm sure you'll hear about it in the media, etc. And it's gonna, well, it's like the history. It's interesting actually, the history of when it's women, like, because there's a rivalry between Florence Nightingale and Mary Seacole. It's always sort of portrayed as this battle of the bitches.
Yeah,
you know.
Yeah.
Where actually, like, there was a ideological conflict and a sort of a larger social structure within which they were pitted against each other.
Yeah.
But it'd be interesting to see how the film handles that.
They never really do that for male rivals, do they? When it's two blokes who are ideologically opposed, it's like, it's a battle of wits, it's a battle of intelligence, a battle of ideologies. It's never like a battle of the bitches or like a battle of the blokes. But when two women are opposed, it's because we're inherently like that. We're just so catty and bitchy. We can't work with each other. It's not that two intelligent women have different ideas about things.
So that's my bit of the week. I thought, do you know what? Just because there's so much negative news out there, I thought I wanted to do something a bit like, you know.
Yeah, it's cool. Yeah, we cover a lot of heavy topics on this podcast, so that was really nice and refreshing. So thanks for that. I'm doing the Olympics.
Woo.
So I've got lots of interesting tidbits and facts and stats and things like that. So, do you watch the Olympics? Do you enjoy the Olympics at all?
Not really. I'm not really into it. I don't watch sport, so I pick up the odd. You get into like random sports though, don't you? Because you never get an opportunity to watch it, and then like you see it, and you're like, oh, that's quite interesting actually.
Yeah. I'm now super invested in the kayak.
I pick it up every now and again. I quite like watching the opening ceremony. It's quite interesting to see like the national characters and how people approach that. But I'm not really a sporty person.
Yeah, I don't really watch much sports at all. I do not follow the football, things like that. But I really enjoy the Olympics. Every time it comes around, I get excited and I watch it. And there's a couple of sports that I do. I follow the gymnastics, male and female, and I quite enjoy a lot of track and field events as well. But yeah, do you know much about the ancient Olympics?
I do actually.
Oh, go on.
So it was introduced in Greece, and what was it say? Come home. Like it was like glory or death, basically. Like if you went, you won, you'd be like the king of the village. But if you didn't win, you'd literally be like banished.
Right.
It was really like serious. They really took it like to the next level.
Right.
Yeah, I'm a bit of a Greek geek.
You probably know a bit more than me. I kind of just have done most of my research on the modern Olympics, and the only little, like, I know a little bit about the ancient Olympics. They did a lot of events naked, I think.
Oh, hello.
And it was men only.
Yeah.
But women could sometimes win only if because they had equestrian events back in the day.
Okay.
In the ancient Olympics, and if you were a horse owner, then you would win.
Oh, so women could enter if they had a horse.
If they had a horse, they could enter their horse. But this would be the gentried women of the ancient Greek time that were, you know.
Yeah. Was it all the different city-states like fighting each other? Like you'd have the Spartans against the
Athenians,
like,
Mycenaeans or Mycenaean.
Kind of like how we've got it now, really, isn't it?
Yeah, nation states.
Yeah.
But there's kind of it's competitive, and yes, everyone wants to win. But there is that spirit, that sense of, you know, community about it as well. It's because we're all celebrating the best of the best. Like when I see incredible athletes, when you see Usain Bolt run, you know, he's obviously not running for England or the UK, but it's just amazing to watch him run, and it's nice to celebrate that. You know what I mean? Even though I'm behind Team GB, but you see an incredible athlete from a different country and you think, wow. So do you know when the first modern Olympics was held? Don't try to look around notes.
I just think knows. Is it 1900?
No.
Okay, no, I don't know.
Then you read the wrong fact. If you're going to cheat properly. The first modern day Olympics was in Athens in 1896. So they brought it back. And can you guess if there were women there?
No, probably not.
There were no women because it was impractical, uninteresting, inaesthetic, incorrect.
Oh, I like that. Incorrect. False.
But women did participate for the first time in 1900 in the Games in Paris. And their events that they were in, as specific women events, were lawn tennis and golf. I think there was a sailing.
Quite posh sports them, aren't they?
Yes, exactly. So if you have, again, the luxury of time, you don't have to work in the mill or whatever, you can just practice lawn tennis.
Or fight for the right to vote.
Yeah. On daddy's grounds. And because women were locked out of a lot of participation in Olympic sports, there was a group set up that for the Women's Olympics.
Okay.
But then the Olympics Committee got really annoyed that they were using the term Olympics, so they changed it to the Women's World Games. And this ran from 1922 in Paris to 1934 in London. And there were 4 events. And it was to address the lack of women's athletic competition. And, you know, they want to showcase the best of the best. It was founded by Alice Milliat after the International Olympic Committee refused to include women's track and field. That was the thing that broke it. And then by 1936, more women's sports were being included, so they did away with it and tried to fight for more inclusion in the existing Olympic Games. So do you know when the first, and you're not allowed to look at my notes, when the first Olympics was that women could compete in every sport?
1945.
Nope.
39.
No.
38.
No.
Is it the one that Germany did?
It's 2012.
What?
Yeah.
Oh, God.
That was the first year that women could compete in every sport because they added women's boxing.
Okay.
And I actually knew this before I did research on this, because I remember Nicola Adams, the boxer from Leeds. It was like historic because she won gold in London. We were hosting. It was amazing. And it was also the first time women's boxing had been included in the Olympics. And it was the first year that women could participate in every event.
Oh, I like her. She's one of my favourites.
She's cool, isn't she?
Yeah, she got a Barbie doll, hasn't she?
Oh, does she?
Yeah.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah.
So the first single women's title was won by an English woman, very good, called Charlotte Cooper, and that was for tennis. But there's a bit of contention in who was the first woman to win an event in to go back to the 1900 Olympics in Paris, because there was a Swiss woman called Helen de Portales, or Portal. She was in a mixed sailing team, and they were awarded just days before Charlotte Cooper won the single women's title.
Interesting.
But yeah, and then in 1912 they added women's swimming. An Australian called Sarah Fanny Durack won the 100 metre freestyle. In 1928 they added some track and field events, but not enough until 1936, because they had the Women's World Games as rivals to this. But a woman called Helena Konopaka from Poland, please forgive my pronunciation, she threw the discus, and she threw it to a length of 39.62 metres. And then in some other track and field events were had in the 1928 Olympics, and in the 800 metre track event it was claimed that many collapsed at the end of the race, and so they didn't introduce the 800 metres for women's back until 1960.
Okay. Bit too delicate.
Yeah. But the thing is, like, you see them, they're not like collapsing at the end of the race now, but they all kind of flop to the floor, don't they? Because you just,
I guess it was a bit more like decorum there, wasn't it? Like,
Yeah.
the ladies can't be ladylike when they've just run 800 metres.
Yeah,
Were they doing it in their corsets though?
Well, now the US didn't enter any swimmers in 1912 because the US rules were that women had to do it in long skirts, like all their sports had to be done in long skirts, so they couldn't. Yeah, I know. It's insane.
Yeah. It cracks me up.
The first Arab Muslim woman was a Moroccan woman called Nawal Al Mutawakkil. I'm so sorry, my pronunciation is rubbish. The 400 metres hurdles. And yes, in 1996 they introduced a woman-only sport, softball, but they don't do that anymore. They got rid of that.
Is it like rubbish baseball?
It's kind of like rounders. Yeah, it's like between rounders and baseball.
Is rounders? Not rounders isn't an Olympic sport.
No,
it?
it's not.
Is that something that people play in? Is that just a school thing?
I don't know. Yeah, probably.
I've not heard about elite rounders.
I used to love rounders.
Yeah, rounders is mint.
In 2000 they added weightlifting for women. Mm-hmm. In 2004 they added wrestling. In 2012, along with adding boxing, they added women in all cycling disciplines, though some of them were short distances. Mm-hmm.
Well, they've got to, really. I think a lot of it, I like to think, we can do whatever they can do. But,
yeah.
I know, the Tour de France, it's not actually possible for women to compete at that level because men
will just dominate.
It's so endurance. It's so hard. It is literally pushing you to the edge, and, women just can't be pushed to that edge.
Yeah.
It's interesting.
Yeah, and with I think at the moment as well, men have a decathlon and women still only do a heptathlon.
Okay.
Things like that. But there's still multidisciplinary events that people, that women can participate in. But yeah, it's interesting. I've not actually done that much research for this because it's about the Olympics, but what you're saying about the endurance as well, because now we're seeing women are beating men in ultra endurance events like days-long races and stuff like that. But then, I don't know, there's an argument that maybe that's a weighted sample, that it's the best of the best women that are entering that, whereas it's not the best of the best men that are entering that. But then, I just feel like it's a bit of a downer on the women who've won. It's like, oh, but you weren't competing against the best of the best men.
Yeah, we don't know. I mean, can we have the 100 metres
birth giving?
You know what? I'm serious. You could work out okay, who's got the quickest time, the quickest delivery.
Yeah.
The least hairage, most flexible, most babies born. As when it was how many women have the most babies born in a year. She gave birth to twins, and then 9 months later some more twins.
Yeah, that's a lot of babies in a year.
Well, I don't know. I'm being silly, but I guess it's
Well, do you know the two sports that are only for women in the Olympics?
The ribbon one.
Yeah, rhythmic gymnastics. Yeah.
Okay. That one where they all swim in the same time?
Yeah, synchronized swimming. Correct.
I didn't even look at your notes, did I?
No, you didn't. Yeah. No, that's good. I used to do synchronized swimming.
Really? Yeah. Do you know what? I can see
that. Of course you can. I say that to people and they go, really? And then they're like, oh, of course you did.
Yeah, did it?
And it's when was the last Olympics? 2016 Rio. Yeah, I was just watching it at home with Mam. And I just said to me Mam at one point, you just kind of, you over the 2 weeks, you just kind of flick it on every so often, and you might catch a bit of it, and you might sit down and get enthralled or whatever. And we were chatting. I can't even remember what event it was, but I said to Mam, we were just in awe of all the amazing athletes. And I said to her, Mam, you've had 4 kids. Are you ever disappointed that not one of us turned out to be an Olympic athlete? And she paused for a very long time. And then she said, there was a period when you and your sister were doing synchronized swimming, and I did wonder. And I'm like, Ma'am, that's not the correct answer. When I ask you if you're disappointed that we didn't become athletes, the answer is, of course I'm proud of you for whatever you do. It's not a long pause.
Man, I don't know. She probably had to ferry you to a lot of different,
She
galas
did.
And
Yeah, she did. Her and me poor dad.
And you know what? I can see synchronized swimming. It's quite a niche thing.
Yeah.
I'm not saying that they're not the best of the best. I'm just saying it's not something that most people do.
No, it was in my local swimming club, so I just did lane swimming, just learning to swim. And then as you go up the classes, as you get better and bigger, towards the end of the night, they did synchronized swimming. So when you're doing the beginners one, you don't really see it because you're out and then a new session comes in. But when you get into the bigger sessions, so you're the last session in, and then afterwards you see the synchronized swimming people.
Okay.
And I just thought it looked really fun, so we just started doing it. And because I do ballet as well, so that sort of stuff.
It's like water dancing, isn't it?
Yeah.
Do they do singular swimming? Or do you have to do it with people to impress people? Do you know what I mean? Can you just swim in the water?
They do. Oh, I think. Well, when I did it, you would get graded on moves as a singular person. So you'd have your troupe, and do your routine, and then there'd be singular bits. So you go through a panel and you'd do your best oyster or whatever, or do your best tub. Oyster is one where they kind of close like an oyster and then go down. But I don't know if the Olympics, if they do, maybe they do. I think they do a troupe, a team, and they do doubles, I think. But I'm not sure.
Okay, interesting.
Yeah. But yes, can you guess the age of the oldest Olympic woman to compete in an Olympics?
56.
No.
It's going to be quite old, isn't it? Because it's got to be an interesting thing. 71.
Very close. 70 years and 5 days. And she was the oldest, and this was in 1972. Mm-hmm. Another British woman, Lorna Johnston. Can you guess what sort of sport it would be?
Was it like that one where you have to walk really fast? Like
No.
the walking one?
No.
Shooting?
No, but you're there. It's, not something that you necessarily
Snooker?
need to... Is that in the Olympics?
Could be, couldn't it?
Should be.
Yeah.
No.
I don't know.
Equestrian.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. You've got to be, it's a bit of a niche thing, equestrian, isn't it?
Yeah, and we actually...
Horse dancing.
Yeah, horse dancing, yeah. And we had a royal compete in the Olympics.
Zara Phillips.
Yep.
The Queen's favourite grandchild, apparently.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
God, imagine being one of those kind of kids and hearing about that on the news.
What have you ever done? Are you in the Olympics yet?
Also, Princess Anne.
Oh yeah, she was doing horsey things as well, wasn't she?
Yeah, she was. Yeah,
and that's Zara's mum, that, isn't it?
Yeah.
The Queen likes horses though, doesn't she?
Yeah.
So
well, rich people like horses, don't they?
Do you know what? If everyone would like a horse if they could though, couldn't they? I
don't know.
Did you have a horsey phase?
No, my sister did. She loved horses, and my mum did as well. That passed me by, and I've met quite a few horses, and they're perfectly fine, but
they're a bit big, aren't they?
Yeah. And I think, I don't know, it's having to do all the stuff that they say. If you want a horse, you have to do all this stuff as well.
You've got to muck it out, haven't you?
And that's the stuff I'm like, oh, I don't like horses that much.
Do you think Zara Phillips has to muck it out, though?
I don't know. I wouldn't like to comment. Probably not. I don't know. Maybe her parents are like, we still need to instill a sense of...
I bet she probably does. I bet you those, her mates don't. But I bet she might be like...
Yeah, maybe.
Because she married a commoner, didn't she? So maybe she did muck it out herself, and that's why.
I mean, we say commoner, but very, very wealthy commoner. But
but
not someone
royal
with a title.
standards, it's a commoner, isn't it?
Yeah. I mean, Sarah Phillips, if you're listening, let us know. Do you muck out your own horse? Email us, make but yeah, so the Olympics are quite amazing, and yeah, and sports is a really great way for women out of poverty as well, especially in places like America. So I just kind of wanted to celebrate that a little bit. There's been a couple of recent changes though that
Yes, controversial changes.
yeah, that might be affecting women's sports, and this is the inclusion of males who identify as women into sports. And I had a bit of a look. So in 2003, the IOC, International Olympic Committee, ruled that men can compete in women's sports if they have legal recognition, if they have had in their acquired gender, which is a terminology they use, if they've had gender reassignment surgery, and if they've been on hormones for 2 years.
Okay.
And then in 2016, the IOC changed this.
Yeah.
And so now there are no conditions like that. The only condition attached is that testosterone has to be below 10 nmols per litre for 12 months.
Is that the women's range of testosterone?
No, the women's range is quite a lot lower than that.
Is that okay? So basically, just like a bloke says, "Oh, I'm a woman," and
yeah, unfortunately, yes. And there seems to be a bit of a confusion about this, because I've seen some people as well saying that, oh well, trans women have been allowed to compete since 2003 and they've not been overrunning women's sports. Well, the conditions were quite different in 2003. Now the conditions have been relaxed a lot. We are seeing more trans women in women's sports coming through. So there's going to be at least 3 at Tokyo 2020 or 2021. It's going to be postponed. Chelsea Wolfe from the US in BMX. Tiffany Abreu from Brazil in volleyball.
Yeah.
And Laurel Hubbard from New Zealand in weightlifting.
Weightlifting.
Yeah.
Yeah. No advantage there then, is there?
Yeah. And it's, you know, obviously trans people should be able to participate in whatever sports they want, you know, have access to a fulfilling life and hobbies and things like that. But there is a sex difference between men and women, and there's a physical difference. And obviously it doesn't mean women are delicate flowers. I mean, you know, watch the Olympics. They'll disabuse you of that notion quite quickly. But men are on average faster and stronger.
Yeah.
And particularly in events like the sprints, or like weightlifting, there's just an advantage there that is conferred upon you because you were born male.
Definitely, yeah. I mean, you've only got to look as well at, like, I think there's an idea like, oh, they would never do that, but countries get desperate for Olympic medals, don't they?
Yeah, you know, there's been mass doping programs as well, and I think it's very naive to assume that a country wouldn't try and take advantage of loopholes in legislation to just try and win the medals that they can. The Olympics is a chance to show yourself on the world stage, you know, and
well, you can dominate, can't you? And it does like go through to sort of it's whether or not you like it or not, it's sort of a political theatre, isn't it?
It is a political theatre. It's a form of cultural power, cultural capital. And I mean, we've seen it. The Olympics has been used for political reasons as well previously, you know, good and bad.
Well, the Nazis tried to show their world dominance, didn't they? And
exactly.
Then when they Berlin Olympics, was it 36, I believe?
Yeah, I think so, yeah.
But then Jesse Owens came along, black fella.
Yeah.
Didn't let him have it, did he?
No. You know, and there's been other protests too. There was I've forgotten the names now. There was the 2 US black guys and the Aussie guy who was a white guy. And they did the 2 guys did
in the 70s, the black power salute, didn't they? Yeah.
And they wanted black gloves, and the white Aussie guy gave them his black gloves. Yeah. And so they've only got one hand each, which is why they're not both doing the same hand, because they've got one of his gloves on each hand.
Oh, okay.
So they're doing opposite hands with the black glove. Yeah. And then that Aussie guy, he was completely like chucked out of his of the Australian committee.
Did he support them then?
Yeah, he completely supported. Yeah, he gave them the black gloves. He was like, I totally support you. So what can I do? And that's why his hands are down as a sign of respect, because he was like, it's not appropriate for me to do this. This is for you, like for you to gain the attention. Use my black gloves. I'm going to keep my hands down. And they were both pallbearers at his funeral, those 2 athletes. I can't remember any of their names now. But if you Google Australian guy 2 US guys, Olympics, Black Power, it will come up with their names.
That's really interesting.
Yeah, they remain lifelong friends and stuff. But yeah, the Australian government only apologised recently for treating him the way he did because he just completely chucked him out.
Yeah.
But yeah, so, you know, it's used for political reasons. I've also got a little note. The first time that countries sent women to the Olympics was, prior to 2012, that's it, London 2012. There were 3 countries that had never sent a female athlete, and they were Qatar, Brunei, and Saudi Arabia.
Oh, surprise.
Yep. So it can be used to kind of show the world how progressive you're becoming and things like that as well, or kind of show the world how you've changed, things like that. Similar to Eurovision in a way. But yeah, so if you think that countries won't try and win a lot of medals to kind of change their image or whatever, or just try and get that cultural capital, then I think you're quite naive.
Very naive.
They'll use whatever means necessary. That's all I had on the Olympics. It's kind of celebration of women in sport, how far we've come. How far I think we still have to go. Women's sport is really underfunded in the UK.
Well, so isn't it like they've in they have the Premier League and they have the women's teams, but they've suspended those teams during coronavirus.
Have they? But not the Premier League. The Premier League's back playing,
going, isn't it?
Yeah.
So and they're talking about elite sports. They're bringing back the men's, but the women's teams are not getting brought back to the same. You know, you know, it's not making any money for them, is it?
Same old, isn't it?
Yeah. So
I think sport is so important. Even, oh God, I don't know about you, but growing up in the 90s, it just felt like you had to love football. I feel like the 90s was like the peak. You must love football all the time, and if you don't, you're kind of out of the culture. And I really wasn't into that at all. But sport, just whatever you're doing, whether it's, you know, something a bit different like archery or something like that, or dancing, you know, it's not really considered a sport, but it's definitely sporty. Yeah. I think that sort of stuff is so important for young people and for young women as well, kind of using your brain and using your body in a way that's not you being looked at, it's your body doing something cool.
Yeah.
And, you know, participation with groups and communities, making friends. And...
definitely. Well, there's so much effort goes into getting women into sports, and I think if you take this sort of elite level competition, then it's going to have an impact lower down the line in sort of the day-to-day. You know, women just don't see it as something that's womanly. So, you know, I think it will have an impact on women's health, not only physical health, but the mental health side of things. Like you say, you know, being in your own body and living in your body, which I think women are seeing their body as an object and not as a sort of thing that they embody.
You are your body.
Yeah.
Great. Anything interesting that's coming up?
I don't know, to be honest. I don't know. They said go to your house, and now I'm just sitting here sulking
like...
don't even want to go out.
Lots of events have been cancelled and things. There's some cool women's seminars that's still going on. So look those up. But really, there's not a whole lot of anything. We just limp on in this interminable purgatory of...
there is something going on. The Speakers Corners events are trying to be relaunched. So I believe on the 30th of August in Hyde Park Corner, Speakers Corner in London, there will be a speaking event. Women are trying to reclaim the space. If you go down there now, there's basically loads of blokes shouting at each other. There's the Islamists and the Christians and the conspiracy theorists of all kinds, and some men's rights activists who, for some reason, blame women for circumcision, male circumcision. That's women's fault for some reason. I don't know why. So there's an effort to sort of reclaim that space. So the 30th of August, which is a Sunday, if you're about, pop down there. You might see me down there. Occasionally been known to get up on the podium, shout a little bit. So if you're in London, pop down there.
So we've come to the last part where we read out a card of Women Who Dare, the card game that DJ Lippy won, and we've come across some really cool women. And who do we have this week?
Mourning Dove, America, 1882 to 1936. Mourning Dove, and it's spelt mourning like mourning the death of somebody.
Like crying, okay.
Crying, yeah. Mourning Dove grew up during the last years that her people, the excuse me for this pronunciation, Okanogan Indians of the northwest coast migrated annually from Kettle Falls, Washington to British Columbia. She remembered packing parfleche bags, being sent out in the evening to gain spirit power, and learning about coyote from the storytellers. Okanogan culture had begun to erode by the time of her birth, however, and when a priest told Mourning Dove's mother that the little girl had to go to a mission school, her mother complied. Mourning Dove put her mission education to use in the service of her native culture by becoming a writer. She proved an important chronicler of the life ways of her people, thus preserving a great deal of knowledge that might otherwise have been lost. Her first novel, Kogiwa, The Half-Blood, 1927, explored the difficulties of being biracial and examined Native American perspectives on religion. Her best-known book, Coyote Stories, first published in 1933 and still in print today, was one of the first collections of native stories gathered and transcribed by a Native American. The book was so popular that a second edition was published within its first year.
That's super cool.
Yeah, I've never heard of her before. Fascinating.
Cool. I think that's it then, isn't it?
Yeah.
Until next time, and hopefully be less of a lockdown and more of a...
Yeah.
We will meet again.
Yeah, stay safe, wash your hands, eat your greens.
Yeah. Get some sunshine.
Yeah.
Boost your immunity. Stay home if you've got symptoms. Until next time.
Bye.